Everything, Everywhere, All at Once got a lot of positive buzz when it came out, but that can often just be a signal that I will not enjoy it, as my tastes do tend to differ from popular opinions and preferences. But was that the case when I finally saw this one? Stick around, I'll share my thoughts. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Everything, Everywhere, All at Once. The synopsis on IMDb reads, an aging Chinese immigrant is swept up in an insane adventure where she alone can save the world by exploring other universes connecting with the lives she could have led. Let me give you just a little bit more about what this animal is. The setup in the first 20 to 30 minutes establishes that Evelyn has these strained relationships with her husband, who is not really the strong, confident man that she wants him to be. She has a strained relationship with her daughter, who on the surface is seeking acceptance of her gay relationship, although as the story unfolds, it's clear she's seeking something much deeper and more important than that. These relatable elements are then dramatized and kind of supersized on a cosmic scale as Evelyn discovers the existence of the multiverse and a grand existential threat to all of the multiverse that she and her family are connected to. Now, it's hard to judge the pace of this movie because I had an unusually cramped week this week. I had to fit this movie in at a time where there were multiple interruptions that took me in and out of it throughout its 2 hour and 20-minute runtime. But having said that, I do think that it keeps changing up its flavors so that I was really never bored. I think if I would have watched it straight and uninterrupted from beginning to end, I don't think I would have been bored for a moment. It's a drama at times. It's a crazy action spectacle at others. It's an absurdist comedy, and sometimes all three at once somehow. And all the flavors are leaned into seriously and work together. And by seriously, I mean the comedy isn't serious. I mean that they really treat it as intentionally as I think they would if this were a full-on comedy movie. They treat the drama as intentionally, and they explore it and lean into it as much as they would if it were just a drama. Same with the action spectacle as well. Also the humor, I think, works well for me in part because of how it's not just a comedy, or they're not leaning into just comedy and action, you know. The absurdist elements often result from characters doing strange things that, through a sci-fi explanation, attune their brains to an alternate reality. And so it doesn't feel like in other movies, other action comedies, where, you know, you feel like the actors, the filmmakers, they all kind of know that they're telling a joke here because they kind of lean into that joke in a certain way, and the acting style, the delivery style changes a little bit when it's joke mode time, you know. But they don't really do that in this movie. They're leaning so hard into taking every moment seriously that when these absurd things happen, even though there's a real justification for them in the logic of the movie, it's unexpected. It's juxtaposed with how seriously they are taking the moment. And so it's that tension between those two vibes that makes the movie funny to me a number of times throughout. And again, for all the humor in this movie, the action is not compromised, and I found it to be some of the most visually engaging action I've seen in a movie in a while. Dramatic beats also are given time and weight, but also fit into surprising moments, you know, and they're brief here and there. I mean, the more the movie progresses, really the more creative, outlandish, and wild it becomes as it leans into the multiverse concept. But I felt like it always had a relatable emotional tether, that even while these crazy, wild, bizarre things are going on, they are saying something, they're contributing in some way, they're related somehow to the drama, to the tension, to the main story. It's not just like, okay, here's a little moment, we're going to go off and be weird for a while, like a Saturday Night Live sketch that doesn't know when to end. No, it's not like that. Everything I felt like was ultimately and often immediately recognizable as feeding into the drama, the themes, and the main plot. There were a few moments in the last hour that I think went a little bit too far for me personally and took me out, but really just a few, less than a handful. The last time I watched something that so effectively and uncompromisingly blended tones to this degree, It was Farscape. It's my favorite TV show of all time that mystifyingly could bounce from one tone and feeling to another without compromising those different moments. The funny moments still being funny, the serious moments still being serious, and the action being legitimately cool, you know. So this one, in a similar way, I think is a very unique and special kind of film that's far more original yet still relatable than most movies are for me. I found it engaging, entertaining, funny, and emotional. If you can't tell, I'm adding this one to my collection. I don't know when, probably soon, but yeah, really enjoyed it. Let me just briefly say that the cast, I thought the performances by all were great. More was asked of some than others in terms of just like a emotional connection and what they needed to present in terms of emotions, but all felt fitting to their characters. I thought it was cast very well, and the moments required of each of these characters. And so I really have no complaints at all about the cast. As far as the stunts and visuals go, man, toward the end of the movie, I was like, how long did it take them to shoot this thing? There are so many universes and settings and costumes and makeup designs, and on top of that, there are more action scenes that I can count with involved fight choreography, and it all looks great. It also uses a combination of digital and on-set effects, on-set lighting, to allow for, through CG, the wild and psychedelic, and also through editing, too. Editing does a lot of kind of the crazy psychedelic vibe. And so it's a combination of these techniques that are used to create this wild spectacle, and I appreciate that, because the more you can use practical things, just like on-set lighting, or lighting effects that are on the set, or physical practical things happening there, then you help to ground everything in reality a little bit more, even when now and then in spurts you're doing psychedelic CG stuff. You know, I just love this approach over the constant green screen CG fests of so many movies. So really appreciated their approach to presenting all these wild visual concepts. Okay, as far as themes, is there anything of moral, philosophical, or spiritual significance going on in the themes of this thing that might trigger some worthwhile thought or conversation? There is too much. Not too much for my preferences, but too much for me to unpack and talk about in a review like this. I could make a thematic commentary track for this movie and would possibly be talking the whole time. Maybe not as much at the beginning, but like by the end, I mean, I was starting to pause the movie and like jot down some notes. I was like, oh my gosh, it's rich. It's rich with things that are worth using at least as a springboard for deeper thought. The themes and messaging of the movie are a mix, as most movies are, a mix of good ideas that are consistent with the Bible and plenty of Hollywood pop philosophies that are not. Let me just, rather than I would love to dive into any one of these a little bit deeper, but I'm not going to do that. What I'll do, I'll share some of the notes that I jotted down, and just to give you an idea of how many springboards I think there are in this movie for some worthwhile thought or conversation. The villain is at one time said to have lost all sense of morality and objective truth. Objective truth. So that is certainly saying, you know, the ideas of relativism of, you know, things being true for you but not for me and vice versa and stuff like that, that was much more prevalent in the 90s and 2000s. More and more we're seeing ideas being presented in fiction that are moving away from that and that are to some degree valuing objective truth, but they don't often come out and actually say objective truth. So I found that interesting. As you might expect, we're dealing with a Chinese family, and so the cultural backdrop of that is going to, if anything, going to tend to be Eastern philosophy, and so there is this idea of restoring balance and it being important to restore balance. I think, though, that is more of a spoken value near the beginning, where it's like by the end, I'm like, I don't think you guys are looking for balance. You're looking to stop this evil, you know, which is kind of a weird thing to think about balance being the ideal, when if good is truly good and not just masquerading as good, if good is more than order but is actually good, then we ought to not want balance, we ought to want only good, you know. But sometimes there's a counterfeit version of good in people's minds that makes them think, oh, there can be too much of a good thing. Not if it's truly good. Anyway, we can explore that. Like I said, any one of these I could jump off on. There's this idea of remaining in the status quo or realizing your full potential, maybe a sort of self-actualization kind of philosophy being touched on there. There's a conflict between a mother and daughter, which so many families can relate to. The mother is not loving the daughter, and by that I mean she might be internally, but she's not loving her as an action. She's not verbing her love toward her daughter. Same with her husband, or maybe she's feeling these things, but she's not acting on love. Love is far more than a feeling; it's an action, and she is not acting in love toward her daughter and husband, and as a result, she's not feeling that love in many cases. And she's unable to really see how to effectively love her husband and effectively love her daughter. There are these big relational gaps. There's a looming divorce that may be happening. But at the same time, there's dreams of her having this romantic marriage that she's swept away by her husband. She does long for that. And there's the value of marriage is propped up as quote unquote a sacred promise, so interesting touch points there. The daughter says to her mother at one point, "You're still caught up on the fact that I like girls. The universe is so much bigger than you realize." And I wouldn't even know where to start with that. There's so many things that could be said about that, about our perspective or emphasis on certain things as Christians, and the whole conversation to be had there. I mean, there's great jumping off point there. If nothing matters, then all the pain and guilt you feel from making nothing of your life goes away. And so this is a person coming from a nihilistic perspective, just seeing life as meaningless, and, it should all come to an end. And all this pain and guilt that you feel, guess what? If you choose to believe that nothing matters, then you can throw away that pain and guilt, and the feelings that you have about making nothing of your life. All of that goes away. That's, my gosh. So we could compare what nihilism has to offer about pain and guilt that you might feel from making nothing of your life, and we could compare that with what the gospel, what the rescuing message and work of Jesus has to say to something like that. I mean, my gosh, there's so much. In a pivotal moment of the movie, a character that I believe was clearly supposed to be the voice of the writers, like this is the message from a sympathetic character that as an audience we are supposed to agree with. We are supposed to not have any reason to dislike them, and so they are the voice of truth in this moment. And this character says, "Please, can we just stop fighting? I know you're all fighting because you're scared and confused. I'm confused too, all day. I don't know what the heck is going on." And then a little later they say, "The only thing I do know is we have to be kind. Please be kind, especially when we don't know what is going on." I think that a good chunk of this movie and that theme, almost certainly, at least I speculate, are born out of the fear and the conflict that we have experienced since COVID, and just kind of what's continued to generate and bubble up from there. We already had in America a divided country politically. It's only becoming more and more divided. And what's interesting, though, is there's not really a good solution. There's a good value being promoted here. Please be kind. We have to be kind, especially when we don't know what is going on. Please be kind. Yes, but why? What are the grounds for being kind in that moment? I think that they know that this is kind of a universal thing that most people that are thinking reasonably are going to agree, yes, we ought to be kind. Of course we ought to be kind. But look back to what this character said. I know you're all fighting because you're scared and confused. So if the fighting is the result of being scared and confused, it is not a solution to say, be kind, please be kind. We have to deal with the fear and the confusion. And there's nothing offered in response to what we do to deal with our fear and confusion about the things that we feel legitimately we ought to be scared and confused about. So it's a pivotal moment in the movie that ultimately I think lacks the substance that we can maybe bring to that topic through our conversations reacting to this movie after we've watched it with family or friends. Still more. One character says, "It's okay if you can't be proud of me, because I finally am. As if this is the state that a person should arrive at, is being proud of themselves, which really puts the individual at the center of their own existence, at the center of their own view on life. Where Scripture is going to have a very different perspective on that we ought not be overly concerned what other people think of us, or even our own estimation of ourselves. And our deeds and things like that, But that, nevertheless, is the philosophy presented in that moment. Let's see here. It's okay that she's a mess, because just like me, the universe gave her someone kind, patient, and forgiving to make up for all she lacks. Now, this is not precise philosophical language. This is conversational, So in all of this that I'm referencing here, I don't want to be like overly hard, and I'm just saying these are jumping off points. And sometimes when fiction is imprecise because it's dealing with dialogue and story and stuff like that, that's why it's a springboard, not a philosophy textbook. It's a springboard for us to kind of like, okay, well, let's talk about this issue that's being touched on here and see if we can drill down and be a little bit more precise and get to the heart of the issue. So it's okay that she's a mess. Well, what does that mean? It's okay, just leave her messed up. I'm not going to get into the details of whatever the mess is, but I mean, they're like character flaws, things like that. Is that okay to have flaws in our character because someone else is in our lives that's patient and forgiving to make up for all she lacks? Well, if by make up they mean kind of counter them and help them to grow and learn and change, then I can see that being like a reasonable sense of it being okay. But having, if my wife has all these amazing characteristics, including being kind, patient, and forgiving, that doesn't make it okay that I have these sin issues. That doesn't make it so that I don't need to address those, and I don't have any responsibility to do that, So there's some imprecision there. I think I understand maybe what they're getting at, but again, a springboard, a starting point for some really valuable stuff for us to talk about and think about. Once again, this movie does perpetuate the Hollywood extreme responses, of which there are really only two that I see in entertainment in general, too, video games as well. The extreme response is given to homosexual relationships, with rejection of those in such relationships being wrong on the part of our entertainment storytellers. They say, we don't want that. That's obviously wrong to reject the people that are in those relationships. And then on the other side of the spectrum of what's right, really not a spectrum. I mean, it's like two. It's very polarized in our entertainment in probably every instance I've seen. The good, the one that they want you to embrace, is complete acceptance and support of that relationship as right. So there's one in which you're rejecting the person, and then the other side is complete acceptance and support of the relationship, which is tied in with accepting the person. There's no nuanced alternative that separates relationship from person. And I think that probably stems from this undercurrent of sexual identity that's very just rampant in a lot of our thinking these days, both in terms of the homosexual relationships and heterosexual relationships. We can find our identity in the romantic relationships that we're in, or other types of relationships, family relationships, and things like that. So there's some stuff there that Hollywood and other entertainment writers haven't seemed to figure out how to explore with nuance yet, and that's continued here in this movie. There's a daughter who's, wanting love and ultimately seeking self-destruction and death when she doesn't receive the love that she longs for. She's really in a dark place, and that's true for a number of people that are in the LGBTQ plus demographic, and something to be aware of. Let's see here. There's a simple life is given value over a glamorous one, or one that achieves great things and things like that. A simple life, just as is the case in this movie, working in a laundromat and doing taxes, and valuing in the midst of the necessary evils and tasks of life, valuing your relationships far over whatever your big accomplishments and dreams might be, or the stressful necessary evils of life that are fighting for your attention. In the midst of that, I feel like one of the final beats of this movie is, in the midst of that, to value your relationships, your family. And there's also a moment in which a character says, and I think this is a pretty significant part of the intended thesis, maybe, of the movie, thematically. There is always something to love, meaning in each person. And even the person we look at and think they are unlovable, I'm never going to be able to get along with them, there is something in them to love. And I think that's very important for us as believers and we can say that there's always something to love. We have better grounds for that than what's the word? The non-believer. What's it when you have like, oh crap, my words are. What's the word they use? This is really bothering me, but it's an uncut review. I am not editing this. There's sacred, and then there's, what's the other one? Dang it. Carrie Fisher. I know who Carrie Fisher is, dang it. If you're listening to the podcast, you know what that's about. Anyway. But there's always something to love in each person, and from a biblical believer standpoint, at the very least, every person is an image bearer of God, and we can find things in their story if we take the time to get to know them. We can find things about their hurt, about their story, about ways that God made them that are good and that reflect His character, that can make them lovable by us. And this theme, not involving the Bible at all, but just there is always something to love in each person, is later underscored, I think, in the final moments of the movie as well. So much going on in this movie. Now, I have no idea what your tastes are in movies, but if I were a time traveler, I'd go back in time and say, Peter. Still trying to remember what that word is, dang it. It's going to come to me after I stop recording. Peter, buy this one. Buy it. You're going to want to show it to people, starting with your wife. There's some good romance drama nestled in with the many other things that this movie is doing. It's one of the most interesting, creative movies that you've seen in a long, long time. I don't know if you would rank it with your favorites or if you even have a list these days, but one of the most striking and enjoyable and engaging movies you've seen in a good long while. Anyway, this one's rated R for some violence, sexual material, and language. And those are my thoughts for now on everything, everywhere, all at once. Right now, I like to take some time to write a tune for pre-made rhyme. The lyrics kind of never change, but the melody gets rearranged. I never know what I'll create to say how much I appreciate Dan Excel, Josh Reading, Gabriel Stinson, Brian Franklin, Olin D. Branham, Drew Rubb, Winston Crutchfield, Lee Bray, Justin D. Myers, Matthew Ridgway, Cosmic Fox, and Joel Nelson. Thank you for supporting me, and SBP and CGC. And now to all who hear this tune, thank you as well. Please come back soon. Want to hear your name and song? Then check out our page on Patreon. All right. I would love to get your thoughts and reactions in the comments below. Please like, share, subscribe, click that bell to stay connected. I want to thank the Spirit Blade Insiders for making this review possible. You can get info about the exclusive benefits of joining over at patreon.com/Spirit Blade Productions. Then I hope you'll check out the Christian Geek Central podcast and stay connected to all CGC content over at christiangeekcentral.com as we continue to geek out and seek the truth. Secular, dang it! For more chat about geek entertainment, answers to your questions, and news from the wider world of Christian geekery, get the Christian Geek Central podcast today on iTunes and other podcast services.